Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to get data from a server. Till now, we've been working on the browser-side functionality, but now we're going to take a step toward the server-side functionality. We're going to head over to our notes project, which is in the collections folder. For this video, we're going to be using a tool called JSON Server, and this tool is going to act as our backend server for now. So at the root of our project, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it db.json. And in here, we're going to put in our collection. So we're going to head over to our main file, and from here, we're going to copy the different notes that we have, and we're going to head back to our db.json file. Now, the syntax we have to follow here is first, we're going to have curly braces, and in here, we're going to have a key. So in our case, we're going to call it notes, and this key is very important. It's going to be part of our server link. So our server is going to be localhost : then we're going to have our port number, then we're going to have a slash, then we're going to have this word. So in our case, we're going to have notes. Now the value of this key is going to be our collection. So we're going to have an array, and in here, we're going to paste in our different notes. The syntax is a bit different when we're dealing with JSON files. All the keys need to be in quotation marks. So we're going to add quotations to all the keys. We also changed the single quotes to double quotes, and now we can save our file. And the next thing we need to do is install the JSON Server tool. And we want to install this tool globally so it works on every project. And in order to do that, we need to open our command prompt with administrative privileges. In here, we're going to run the following command. We're going to have npm install JSON Server. Here, npm is the package manager, and we're using the G flag since we are doing a global installation, and we're going to press enter. Once the installation is done, we can exit out of our command prompt. The next thing we need to do is run the JSON server. So we're going to open our terminal, and we're going to navigate to our project, which is in collections and in notes. And in here, we're going to run the following command: npx JSON server -- port 3001 watch db.json. The port flag lets us provide the port number we want our server to run on. The watch flag keeps track of the different changes we make to our server, and db.json is going to be the name of the file that contains our collection. And you might have noticed here that we used npx instead of npm. That is because we're running this command locally in our project. Now we can press enter. Now we're going to open the link under resources in our browser. When you open the link, your page might look a bit different. If you want to get the same format that I'm using, you can install an extension called JSON View, which I'll be putting in the description below. And once you've installed that extension, you should have the same format as I do now. So now our plan is going to be to save notes to the server we just created, which is the JSON server. Our React code is going to fetch the notes from the server and is going to render it to the browser. And when we add a new note, we're going to send it to the server. That means if we reload our page, the new note we added should not disappear since it's going to be saved to our JSON server. So our first task is going to be fetching the already existing notes to our application from the JSON server. We're going to be using the Axios library to communicate between the browser and the server. So we need to install the Axios library, and we're going to open our terminal, and we're going to navigate to our project. And in here, we're going to run npm install Axios. Once that installation is complete, we're going to run one more command, which is npm install JSON server -- save dev. What this command does is it installs the JSON server as a development dependency. What does this mean? A development dependency is a package that is used during development of our application and testing our application, but it is not going to be required when we put our application to production. So we're going to press enter. Now, since we've been running relatively long commands, we can actually use a shortcut. We can go to our project and navigate to package.json. And in here under the scripts key, we can add a new key. We're going to call it server. And it's going to have the value JSON server at port number 3001. It's going to have the watch tag and it's going to have our server name. So what this is going to do is we can simply run npm run server and it's going to start our server at port number 3001. One more thing you need to notice here is that we're going to be using two terminals. One terminal is going to run our application and another terminal is going to run our JSON server. So we're going to start both of them up. So we're going to open our terminal. If you haven't closed the previous terminal, close them and we're going to start from the beginning and we're going to navigate to our project. And first let's run our application using npm run dev. Now we can press on the plus icon, which is going to give us a new terminal. And in here, we're going to run our server using npm run server. We get an error that is because we haven't navigated to our project's directory. So we're going to cd into collections and to notes. And now we can run npm run server. Now we're running both our application and our JSON server. In our main file, we're going to go to the top and we're going to import Axios from Axios. We're going to be using the Axios library to communicate with our server. So we're going to be using different functions like get, which is going to get data from our server. We can also use a function called post, which is going to send data to our server. Now we're going to look at the get function. So let's just create a variable. We're going to call it promise. And we're going to set it equal to axios.get. And in here, we're going to pass in the link to our server, which is http localhost/notes. Now to see what this looks like, we're going to console.log the promise. And we can save our file and go to the browser. Now, if we look at the console, we get a promise object. So the axios.get function returns something called a promise. So a promise in JavaScript is like a placeholder for a future result of an operation that may be successful or unsuccessful. In our case, if we expand our promise, we see that the promise state is fulfilled. That means our promise was successful. But let's say if we gave the get function an invalid URL, in that case, we would have a promise state of rejected. So promises are used to represent asynchronous operations, such as fetching data from a server or reading a file, where the result isn't immediately available. When the get function sends an HTTP request to the server, this might be successful or unsuccessful, as we said, and we can control what happens using different functions, which we're going to be looking at. In our promise, we can use a function called then, which is going to give us a response. And in here, we can run code that executes if our promise was fulfilled or if our promise was successful. So we're simply going to console.log the response. And another function we can use is the catch function. So this also gives us a response. In the catch function, we're going to have code that's going to execute if our promise fails. So here we're going to simply console.log error. And now if we save our file and go to the browser, if we look at the console now, we get another object. And if we expand it, we get the following information. The main thing we need to focus on here is the data attribute. If we expand the data, we see that it is an array, and this array contains all the nodes we have in our server. So we're going to be using this property to display the different nodes that we have in our JSON server. Back in our code, we're going to remove the catch and the then function for readability, and we're going to pass it in on a new line. So we're going to have promise.then. Then we're going to have our response. And in here, we're going to create a new variable and we're going to call it notes. And we're going to set it equal to what we just saw. So we're going to use response.data, which is an array that contains the different notes that are in our JSON server. Since we're going to be using this variable, we can delete our collection from our main file. The next thing we need to do is move the React DOM function inside our promise in order to use the notes variable. So we're going to copy our render and we're going to pass it in our promise. And finally, we can add a catch function, which is simply going to console.log error. Now this might look like it works fine, but we're going to run into different problems. The main file in our project is our entry point to our application, and placing a promise in here would make our application less responsive, since it's going to be pausing the execution of our program and it's going to be waiting till the promise is dealt with. So it's a good practice to move all our promises to our app file instead. So we're going to put our main file back to how it usually is. So we're going to delete the promise. And finally, since we're not going to be taking in a notes input, we're going to remove it from our component. We're also going to remove the import statement since we're going to be having it in our app file. So we can save our main file and go to our app file. We've been using the useState function till now in our projects, but there's also another very important function which we're going to be using, which is the useEffect function. The useEffect function lets you manage side effects. So side effects are actions that occur outside the normal flow of your component. So this could be fetching data from a server, which is what we're going to be using it for. So basically, we use the useEffect function when we want to deal with asynchronous operations. So in our import statement, we're going to add useEffect. We also need to import Axios. Since we don't have any more input, we're going to remove props. And as the initial value of our notes variable, we're going to pass in an empty array. Now here we're going to use the new function we just imported, which is the useEffect function. So we're going to have useEffect, which is going to take two parameters. The first is going to be a function, and the second parameter is going to be a list of dependencies, which in our case is going to be an empty list. And inside the function, we're going to have the piece of code that is going to execute asynchronously. So we're going to have our Axios function inside the useEffect. So we're going to have axios.get, and we're going to pass in our server. Then we're going to use the then function, which is going to give us a response, and we're going to use the setNotes function and give it the value of response.data. Now we can save our file and go to the browser. As you can see, our notes are rendered from our JSON server. Now we've properly implemented rendering our initial notes from our JSON server. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.